Hello, everyone, and good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight, Christmas Day, at least here in New York area. But as usual, welcome to our regular monk chat. So now is your opportunity to ask our panel of monastics here at Empty Cloud Monastery any questions you might have related to or somewhat related to Buddhism and Buddhist practice. So all the way on your left, perhaps my right, is Tansanti. Maybe you could bow so the audience can know. Also the tallest monk on the panel. And then we have Ayasoma in the middle.
The shortest monk.
And Bhante Sadaso.
The middle monk.
So thanks everyone for joining. And again, don't hold back if you have questions. Elaine says, Bhante Sadaso, I've been revisiting your meditation instructions that you presented prior to your talk on karma. It's been very helpful as I have experienced moments of peace for the first time in a while.
I'm happy to hear that. To be honest, I don't remember what instructions I gave before the talk on karma. Silent illumination?
Possible.
I mean, odds are it was either silent illumination, mindfulness of the body, or the perception of impermanence. That's all I ever really talk about. Anyway, I'm happy to hear it's being helpful to you.
And then AP asks, are there any teachings in the Vesude Maga that are in contradiction to the Pali Canon?
Anybody other than me familiar with the Vesude Maga? Do you want to talk about this?
I would only offer my my own really just interpretation, opinion, which would be it's one of the great interpretations and commentaries of the Pali Canon. It's a synthesis, mainly compiled from the previous 1,000 years of commentary on the Canon and from the Canon itself. I can't think of anything that leaps to mind as being in contradiction. Certainly there are some strong interpretations where other commentators might judge otherwise.
I don't recall the specifics. I recall there being a small handful of things which are in contradiction, but mostly it's specific ways of interpreting material from the suttas. And so the usual objection to the Visuddhimagga is not saying that the Visuddhimagga is wrong per se, but rather saying that it's too narrow and rigid in its presentation. Another major criticism of the Visuddhimagga is that it provides this massive emphasis on kasina meditation, whereas kasina meditation is barely even mentioned in the suttas. In the suttas, the Buddha emphasizes mindfulness of breathing, mindfulness of the body, brahmaviharas, perception of impermanence, of not self. He barely even mentions the existence of kasina meditation, except on rare occasion. Whereas in the Visuddhimagga, kasina meditation becomes the central, foremost meditation practice. That's the main criticism of the Visuddhimagga that I've heard. But that's not really a point of contradiction, more a difference of emphasis.
Thank you. And Key says, Key from Australia, season's greetings and happy Buddhamas from Sydney.
I think it's still Christmas Eve over there. Is that how it works?
I think they're a day ahead, so it's Santo Stefano. I don't know how you say it in English. Saint Stephen.
Saints Day.
We don't say it.
Oh, it's a big thing in England.
Day after Christmas.
Yeah.
Or is that Boxing Day?
In the UK, it's Boxing Day, so maybe in Australia as well.
Which It's the day you put your gifts into boxes or something. I was never clear on that one.
Well, it's another saint day in Italy, but good to see you, Ki. Sadhu for joining us tonight.
Yes. And Gita Ratnayake also says metta to all. Denise asks the contact phone number for the monastery. I'm chuckling because there is no contact phone number for the monastery. One is in the works, but send us an email, or if you already did, we will check it because it's about dana. So yes, send an email to food at mtcloud.org. And if you already did, we'll check it ASAP. And then Gita Ratnayake asks, is self-view in layman terms self-centeredness? Ayasoma.
Loaded question. Is self-view in lay terms?
So I'm not sure, Gita, if you mean for lay people or laymen, meaning like the common everyday meaning.
Terms.
Yeah, simple terms.
Oh, in lay. Okay. Can you repeat this?
Is self-view in layman terms self-centeredness?
Well, it depends on how you define all of these things fundamentally. But yes, of course, there is definitely the element of self-centeredness for sure until we attain a level of awakening. I mean, just reflecting, just looking at your mind, looking at how we relate to others. Actually, Bhante Sumano this afternoon did a little workshop here for the community. And if I remember correctly, the topic, the subject of the sort of course was distorted lenses. And then after we had a little conversation with one of our some of our community members, and we were all sharing, all the different kind of lenses that we were using to see kind of pretty much the same experience of reality. So you can say that it's not necessarily just one person that is being self-centered. We're all being self-centered in one way or the other. It's just that with Buddhist practice, we're making the commitment to destroy this self-centeredness and understand different perspectives, and then ultimately transcend this prison of distortion, this prison of self-centeredness, transcend the self altogether.
And Cows Are Friend says, can you maybe talk a bit about puja? What is its purpose? Should we all do it? Is there someone who benefits from offerings that we do?
Yes. So, what is puja? Well, the simplest answer is that puja is a ceremonialized act of offering. And commonly this involves putting flowers, incense, candles, food, or other material offerings in front of an image of a Buddha or Bodhisattva. And puja also includes offering respect in the show of bowing. And puja also includes reciting Dhamma or chanting devotional verses, verses of homage and respect and recollection of Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. And it can also include meditation practice. So meditation is also an offering that we make. So what are we offering to? Well, the simplest answer is that we're offering to Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. But a more precise way of talking about this is that we are generating a mind state of offering. We're generating the internal mental attitude of offering, of giving something to that which we truly respect and admire and aspire to be like. And by so doing, we are generating that mind of admiration and respect and aspiration for that which is highest, for the state of Buddhahood. So the act of puja, if it's done with this attitude, is another form of meditation practice. It's another way of bringing into being wholesome mind states that incline the mind towards enlightenment. On the other hand, if you perform physical acts of puja while thinking, I hate this is stupid, this is a meaningless ritual, the Buddha's not going to eat this fruit, why am I putting it here? I hate the smell of this incense, I don't like bowing, then what you're doing is generating unwholesome mind states, which will not lead you to enlightenment, and in fact will probably lead you away from enlightenment. So I'm guilty of this. In my early Buddhist days, I tended to be the guy who was like, this is so dumb. The Buddha's never going to eat those oranges. Why did they put them on the altar? Why didn't they put them out for lunch? I would have eaten the oranges. The Buddha's not going to eat those oranges. Or bowing, and I'm like, why are we bowing? This is so dumb. We should just meditate. Or chanting. Why are we chanting? Well, actually, chanting's kind of fun. Okay, I can get on board with the chanting because it's fun. But really missing the opportunity that these activities create. The activities are an external reminder to us to generate these wholesome attitudes of mind. Similarly, I was staying at a Sri Lankan temple for a while a few years ago, and there's this teenager who was the son of a Sri Lankan family. So the son had grown up in America and was culturally American. So he was always irritated when his parents would drag him to the temple and make him do things that he saw as un-American, as in it just didn't make sense to him. And so, like, one of the things they do in Buddhist temples is they ceremonially offer a bowl, usually a bowl and a robe and a shaving razor and like your standard monk kit. They'll ceremonially offer it to a monk. But I mean, usually the monk just sets it aside and it goes back in the monastery storehouse until the next layperson wants to come and offer it to a monk. So the teenager saw this and he's like, nobody is actually getting anything out of this. Why are they're just like moving it from place to place and it passes through a monk's hands at one point? This is stupid. And I'm like, that's one perspective. But there's another way of looking at this. That person who's offering the bowl and the robes and shaving razors and so on, who's offering that to a monk, they're generating within themselves the mind state of wanting to physically, tangibly support the monastic community. They're generating the experience of giving the basic requisites of monastic life to a monk. So that has, even if you take it in the most scientific materialist viewpoint, that has a psychological impact, which is undeniable. And from a Buddhist standpoint, it also generates a karmic impact. In that this person then will have the karmic affinity for supporting monastics, the karmic affinity for appreciating monasticism, the karmic affinity which will keep bringing them back into contact with Buddhism life after life after life, with an attitude of respect and appreciation. Whereas if every time we're doing puja, we're thinking, this is so dumb, I hate this, then what we're actually building up is a negativity and aversion towards Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, which will push us away from Buddhist practice in future lives. So puja is an opportunity to strengthen our affinity with Buddhism, to strengthen our affinity with Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, so that we'll keep drawing closer and closer to it as life after life goes by. Okay?
Thank you, Bhante. And the next question is from Elaine, who asks, how young can one start teaching a child to meditate? I was thinking of placing a block, I assume a yoga block, on my 22-month-old's head and having her attempt to sit still and focus on it for about 2 minutes. Thoughts? Tansanti?
Well, I wouldn't advise. I would do a little reading on that subject before pushing ahead with it. That would be my approach. We aspire for our children to enjoy all the wonderful things in life we've benefited from ourselves and more. So I think the motivation that's moving you to want to teach your child to meditate is a good one, an admirable one. But I'm not sure that's really in I'm sorry, did we say daughter?
Just child. I'm not sure. Daughter, granddaughter,
capacity at that age. I have a daughter myself, and I'm thinking back to when she was 2, and she couldn't have sat still for 2 minutes. She could barely hold herself upright at that point. I wonder what the practices are in traditional Buddhist cultures with teaching children to meditate. I've never really heard of it before 7 or 8 years old, but I'm not really. I don't know very much about that. Do either of you have any knowledge of that?
My understanding is that normally when they're that young, they just focus on teaching giving and morality, and meditation practice, if it's taught at all, is not taught until they're at least 6-7 years old.
In the stories I've heard about the teaching of giving is that it's quite a joyous thing. It's a fun thing. And I would encourage that too in any kind of effort to cultivate your child's spirituality, that it be purely by volition, that there be no strictness, no enforcement involved, that it's simply something enjoyable for you and your child to do together. And when it stops being that, then to back away a little from it, because you want your child to be drawn to it rather than to feel kind of cornered into it. That's my sense.
I would also say that chanting, the only difference between a sing-along and chanting is what you call it. So rather than doing sing-along with silly children's songs, or maybe in addition to the silly children's songs, you could also play some recordings of some nice, beautiful Buddhist chanting. And as your child gets more familiar with it and maybe starts to enjoy it, then you can get them to chant along. So that's another way of starting to get some Buddhist practice into their mind. Or maybe teaching them to make Anjali to a Buddha image. There's a really lovely recording. One of our friends named Kevin, he has, I think the child is like 2 or 3 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So he has these recordings of his little 2 or 3 year old son, like making Anjali to the Buddha statue and chanting Namo Tassa Bhagavata Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. It's just the cutest thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell that the little boy is really enjoying the activity. So I'm not much for children or teaching them or interacting with them. Really, it's really difficult for me. So I'm not the best person to ask about teaching children anything, actually. But these are some observations I've noticed.
Yeah, and as soon as the pandemic is over, or at least more manageable, I encourage you to go to a traditional Buddhist temple. And so then the child can be with other children their age and partake in the practice of giving, of generosity, and sometimes also actually just sitting still in a meditation hall with other adults meditating. At the Long Island Buddhist meditation we had, I remember the first time I went there, actually, there was she perhaps was a little bit older than 2. She was like about 3 and completely restless. And the grandfather, at a certain point, we're doing a period of meditation, and the grandfather was just, keeping her there, and there was another child, and they were messy, and the adults were just practicing being okay with sometimes yelling, sometimes running around, sometimes sitting still, sometimes being reprimanded. It was totally fine. And the children were kind of getting a hint at the very beginning when they're like, oh, these adults are really weird. Why are they as if the thing before wasn't boring enough? Now they're also silent and still and quiet with their eyes closed. So And after a while, they were kind of like, oh, actually, maybe it's not that bad. It's kind of peaceful. And they would just stay still. And so you see how, when it's actually part of the culture, that in particular, the meditation center is a Sri Lankan temple. When it's part of the culture, there's a way of, it's a millenary tradition. So they haven't like just kind of created a business plan and went, okay, from the age to 2 to 4 or like 6 to, I don't even know, actually, I don't have children. So I don't know exactly the, the age ranges, but point being, there's not like kind of study on it. It has been incorporated because everybody goes to the temple, everybody practices and supports each other in Dhamma. So it's just very natural, very wholesome, very like smooth. Not too much brain, trying to figure out how to put the brick on top of the head, but rather, more organic, I would say.
Thank you. And Gita Ratnayake asks, can you clarify the difference between asmimana and ditthimana? Sounds like a question for Bhante Sadasa.
Actually not familiar with the term ditthimana. So asmimana is a term that we have. So asmi is the verb I am. It's literally what it means. And mana means conceit. So asmimana is the conceit I am. Or in simpler terms, asmimana is the belief in self-existence, the belief in separate individual existence. Whereas mana by itself more commonly means conceit in the sense of the conceit of superiority, the conceit of inferiority, and the conceit of equality. So that's its more general use. Or just more generally speaking, any kind of self-view. So thinking, I am this or I am that, or I have these traits and qualities, and I am defined in this way and that way. That would all fit under mana in its more general use of meaning any kind of self-identity. Whereas asmimana is the underlying problem from which all those specific identities arise. So asmimana is the belief, I exist as a separate individual entity. That's asmimana. So again, I'm not quite sure where the term ditthimana is coming from because I don't remember seeing it in the suttas. But it sounds like that's the distinction that's being made, that asmimana is the belief in self-existence, the belief I exist as a separate being. And ditthimana then would probably be referring to the specific self-identities. I am fill in the blank, whatever we think we are.
Thank you, Bhante. And Elaine says, yes, it was her granddaughter. She's been doing giving and also speaking every night about the 5 precepts. She also sees Elaine prostrate and chant, and she can say Namo Tassa.
Sad.
Make recordings.
Yeah, make recordings and share it with us.
And hello as well to Melinda. And Disa says, excellent explanation of the meaning of puja. I also used to think it was meaningless, but not anymore. And Kevin says hi also.
Oh,
New York City. Well, I don't know if he's currently in New York City, but
yeah, I think if we were not born Buddhist, we all went through a similar phase of not really understanding. It's just part of the learning process.
And Undone has a question. So how can we detach ourselves from unrequited love, crushes or heartbreaks, and also losing love from family members who forget us due to mental decline? Does this affect our karma or rebirth?
It's 2 questions in one.
Yeah. Perhaps Ayasoma would shed some light.
All right, I'll try. So remember the second question. What was the first question?
So the first is, how can we detach ourselves from unrequited love, crushes, or heartbreaks?
What does unrequited mean?
Unreturned.
Unreturned. So how do we reconciliate unreturned love?
Detach from it. So I guess maybe get over not receiving love from somebody who you actually feel you love.
These are all these generic questions. I don't do very well with generic questions, because then I need to create the story, and I'm a very visual person. So when Elaine said, "Oh, I have like a grandchild," then I'm like, okay,
like a hypothetical
you
situation.
put your on the head and all
yes, but someone who does not
love you back.
But have you been in a relationship with them or not?
So this is crushes.
Crushes, just obsession. Delusion. So we're in the realm of delusion. Well, the greatest thing actually about overcoming delusion, is first of all, acknowledging that there is delusion. So acknowledging what is happening first. And, what really works for me is actually recollecting the disappointment of past similar scenarios. So how many crushes have we had in this lifetime alone, without even having to have superpowers of recollecting past lives, so to speak? Within this lifetime, I mean, unless we are 2 years old, unless we are Elaine's grandchild, we probably had a fair number. And how many actually have we pursued? And when you start recollecting it, with a little bit of distance, you see that the pattern that back then actually it always seems unique. You're like, oh wow, this person, incredible, exactly everything I've ever wanted in life. So you meet them, and then you start actually hanging out with them, and then you're like, everything I wanted in life except for the fact they're not really that creative. I always wanted someone creative. This person isn't really that creative. Oh, except for the fact they're a little bit self-centered. I never really wanted someone self-centered, except fill in the dot. So basically, from the list of they're the greatest person I've ever met in my life, they become not so great, until it's just awful. And then you go to the next crush, and it's all over again. You just kind of change the dot. Sometimes you don't even change the formats, because I've noticed that a lot of people are not equal opportunities. That they think they are, but they actually I have a friend who has gone through different relationships, and it's incredible how identical all their partners were, each time around, physically and career-wise and personality-wise. Yet he was convinced that he was going out with a different person each time. I was like, because I was actually even there too present, I was like, sure you broke up? It's it's the same. So sometimes it's really easy also to actually physically, visually see the repetitiveness of the pattern. Sometimes, we can decorate it and change a little bit, perhaps instead of all of them being Russian, you can do Russian from Kenya, another one from Canada, another one from Italy, whatever. And you're like, oh, okay, they're actually somewhat physically different. Then you're like, oh, they're all fashion designers or something. Or they're all into whatever, the opera. You can start drawing collective things. But point being is that when we start reflecting on the pattern, it's not really that the person is the subject, but rather it's that we start mythologizing. We start creating this story, just kind of I'm creating this story based on your words. And so we connect these dots that perhaps aren't even there, and we just live in this beautiful delusion that it's this endless cycle of samsara, that we think it's always unique, but in reality, we are repeating the same thing over and over again. And we focus all of our energy to shift these conditions, these external conditions, with the hope that we're going to be happy. But in reality, it's a lost battle from the start. So when one starts reflecting in that way, recollecting the past, I think it's actually very useful to come to terms with the present and understanding that the dynamics aren't terribly different in the present, and that the future results won't be radically different than the sort of results that we had in the past. So then this kind of this passion arises, where like we understand, we see closely. Equanimity actually starts arising. You're like, oh, okay, I understand. That's dukkha. It's only dukkha rising and dukkha ceasing. And instead of engaging in this pattern over and over again, I can actually intentionally practice the teachings of the Buddha. So perhaps instead of pursuing craving, I can pursue letting go. I can pursue stopping, like removing the roots of the suffering, rather than fueling the suffering or keeping the flame of suffering alive. We can just stop feeding it altogether and let it fade away on its own. And so the answer is always the fourth noble truth, the Noble Eightfold Path. There's no other way through which we can accomplish what needs to be accomplished. And the second question was
how to deal with losing love from family members who forget us due to mental decline.
That is more challenging. I mean, in essence, it's always the same practice. So the recollection of impermanence, the recollection of suffering, actually, and the recollection of not self. So on looking at the three characteristics and also seeing how we take for granted all of this. I have aging parents. They're close to 80 now, and their mental faculties are declining rapidly. So perhaps they still understand who I am, but they forget what they've just told me like a minute before. So we sometimes have these like endless conversations about the same thing over and over again. Like perhaps it's like 1 hour of conversation, but the topic is the same, repeat for 60. So it's like 1 minute topic, but repeat 60 times. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit. This is kind of how it feels. And it's very distressing when I take it in that way, because there is this expectation of my parents to be just, how I left them when I moved to the United States 10 years ago. So the delusion of permanence, the delusion that my parents will always be there, that they will be competent, capable intellectually, that they won't need any help to do anything, but they're becoming more and more helpless, actually. They need more and more guidance, actually, in so many different ways. So yeah, being gentle with ourselves is very important. We're unenlightened, so there's still the delusion of permanence. There's still, the experience of suffering. And the closer it gets to us, the more, the more we're attached to the self. So the more we're attached to our quote unquote extended self, our family. So understanding that this is actually the first noble truth. What the Buddha is talking about. He's not talking about, oh, I broke my nail and it's so much suffering, or, I didn't get. Today I wanted Italian food, but there was American food on the table, or whatever it is. I mean, there is, of course, a component of dukkha there as well, but that's not what we're trying to address with Buddhist practice. what we're trying to address, what we're trying to get to the root of is this profound suffering. But before going to the antidote, one really needs to explore what that means. So really look at your experience, really see the tragicness of it all. But also don't get depressed, and actually do be with your family, be with your members, start developing unconditional love, that you will love your family members, whether they know who you are or not, whether they recognize you. How beautiful is that? What a big, incredible gift. That, you know, it doesn't matter what kind of relationship or reaction they will have towards you, you're still capable of being there and loving them without wanting anything back. So it's incredible, you know, very intense training, but take it as an incredible opportunity to practice really the teachings of the Buddha. Mm-hmm. There's a request from the audience from Maya Seda, who wants to hear Bhante Sudasa's thoughts.
Yeah, recognize that desire is suffering. And recognize that...
Not on the second question, on the first question.
I'm talking about the first question.
Yes, but
to clarify,
online might have not heard.
Yeah, so it's, there's a request that I answer the question about crushes and unrequited love. Well, first off, recognize that desire is suffering. So wanting that relationship or wanting that experience is just making you unhappy. It's just making you suffer. And recognize that it's unattainable. So especially if it's like some celebrity in another country, that's definitely completely unattainable and impossible and will never happen. So you know it's just a meaningless, ridiculous daydream. And that fueling it is just creating a tremendous amount of dukkha. That's all it's doing. It's creating an idea that our happiness is dependent upon something that will never happen. And that's entirely self-created, and we can stop at any time and instead be happy with the moment as it actually is. Like this moment right now is amazing. It's really great. But as long as we're lost in our daydream about some other reality which we have never experienced and never will experience, then we're missing how wonderful this moment is. But even if it's something more attainable or something that seems more attainable, like maybe a crush on your next door neighbor, or a crush on your next door neighbor's partner, or a crush on your coworker, or whatever it is. The reality is that the story we tell ourselves is always better than the actual experience. So in our mind, we create these fantasy scenarios of the perfect relationship. But the reality is always a mixture of pleasure and pain. It's always a mixture of pleasant and unpleasant. It's always a mixture of what we want and what we don't want. And even the best relationships are like that. They're a mixture of pleasant and unpleasant. So it's bringing it into reality. That's what breaks through all of that. As Ayasama was saying earlier, crushes are built upon delusion. So when we start puncturing that delusion, then the crush melts away. Okay.
Thank you, Bhante. And Elaine says, thank you for sharing your time and Dharma with us today. It's meant a lot to stay connected during this Christian holiday. May all blessings be yours, Venerables.
It's a Christian holiday?
Christmas is a Christmas
holiday.
We're a little disconnected from the calendar.
So Christmas is a celebration of generosity and gratitude, which are Buddhist qualities. So I would like to suggest that it's a Buddhist holiday. And so Santa is actually a Buddhist monk who wears a fake beard. His robes are almost the right color. And he goes around giving gifts on Christmas so that people can practice gratitude for the gifts that they receive, and also so that they can be inspired by Bhante Santa's example and give gifts to other people as well. Actually, that'd be Bhante Claus because Santa is already a title. Bhante Claus.
Yeah.
Klaus. Bhante Klaus. So Christmas is a Buddhist holiday celebrating generosity and gratitude as expressed by Bhante Klaus.
Okay, that's very interesting.
And Undone also says, thank you, Ayasama, for your personal story. I relate to it a lot, and I appreciate your honesty. I will try to work on my reflections more. And Bhavani says, Namaste. Till now, I had to think, speak, act, dress, etc., according to the restrictions of my family members before and after marriage. After knowing loving kindness meditation, I'm now trying to make my own identity, but I don't know how to do that. It's also troubling for my family members, for whom I look very selfish. Santi has some words?
Well, life is a series of experiments. In a way, it sounds like you're following a wholesome impulse to free yourself in a way from imposed practices, beliefs, expectations, and it sounds like at the same time you're trying to be sensitive to people you care about. Trying to strike that balance is not easy, but it's well worth your attention. At the same time, I wouldn't beat yourself up about it. You have a right to find your own path. If you're cultivating Buddhist values of respect and attention and awareness, you'll continue to be sensitive to what others need in terms of transgressing any bounds or anything. But carry on. It sounds really valuable. It's very natural that it's not easy.
Yeah, so I agree with everything he said. I would also like to say that you said your family members think that you're being selfish, but to be honest, it sounds to me like your family members are being selfish. That's what it sounds like to me, because they want you to match their arbitrary determinations of how you're supposed to be. So, and it sounds like that's all happening without any interest whatsoever in your feelings. That's actually really violent. That's not loving, that's not caring, that's violent. But it might be coming from a place of delusion. Realistically, it almost certainly is coming from a place of delusion. They might actually think that's what's good for you. Or they might just be acting out their conditioning, their own cultural conditioning, without even realizing that's what they're doing. This is actually the case of the vast majority of people. The vast majority of people are just blindly acting out their cultural conditioning. They think they're making choices, but they're actually just repeating what they were told to do their entire life. So have some compassion for them, and compassion for the suffering that they're creating for themselves. But you're not by any means obligated to follow their expectations or their demands. Not by any means at all. Yeah.
Thank you. And Kowser Friend says, is that a Guan Yin statue in the background?
Yes.
Do bodhisattvas play a role in practice at Empty Cloud?
Yes.
Would you like to say more?
No.
Great.
It depends on the individual monastics.
I love bodhisattvas.
Yes.
I'm hearing a resounding silence to my left.
I'm okay with bodhisattvas.
I'm all for bodhisattvas.
Yeah. We also technically, our meditation hall is called the Guan Yin Hall.
Yeah, and its centerpiece is a mural of Guan Yin.
Mm-hmm. And we also have an outdoor statue of Guan Yin, which is
the biggest one in the monastery. It's 10 feet tall.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah, biggest statue in the monastery.
We
We're
need
actually
a taller
all about
Buddha.
Guan Yin. I'm okay with getting bigger Buddha statues, but you're pointing out we're actually very Guanyin focused here. We also have a big Guanyin in the foyer. Yeah.
I really am delighted to have Guanyin as such a prominent presence at Empty Cloud, coming from a kind of more strictly Theravada only setting. Up at Temple Forest Monastery in New Hampshire, a wonderful monastery, but no Guanyins in evidence. But I really like the opportunity to reflect, and I actually, now I'm making the connection. This is why I've been reflecting more consistently on the importance and centrality of compassion to our practice. Guanyin being the Bodhisattva of compassion. How important it is, I think, that we really consider the centrality of the Buddha's infinite compassion to what made him such a unique and marvelous being. And what I've been thinking about is just how the essence of the practice is to expand and widen our circle of compassion. And we all have a kind of, I think, I wouldn't say absolutely every one of us, but most of us from very early in life have a sense of profound compassion for people very close to us. And as we develop more and more, we learn to expand that beyond like our brother, our sister, our parents, our grandparents, and work outwards to our friends. And then maybe we start to learn to move outwards from there. And to me, the ideal of infinite compassion for all beings is a wonderful ideal to hold in mind as one practices.
Sadhu.
Yeah, I'd also like to add to that another bodhisattva who I personally find very helpful and inspiring is Jizo, or in Chinese he's called Di Zhang. So Jizo Bodhisattva. We don't have any big images of him yet. I keep hoping, but we have a number of small ones. But the reason I think of Jizo is because basically every time I hear about all the various horrible things happening in the world these days, I think about Jizo, who made the vow to teach Dharma in the hell realms. And the vow to stay in the hell realms teaching Dharma until every single being in the hell realms has made it out, which is an impossible vow because the hell realms will never be empty. So he's made this incredible determination to stay in the hell realms teaching the Dhamma for as long as there are beings who need help. So every time I think about the various awful things happening in this country, or mostly this country, then I remember Jizo. I'm like, well, if Jizo can endure the hell realms, then I can endure this country and keep being here for the benefit of others.
It's intense.
Thank you, Venerables. And Disa said, in reference, I think, to Asmimana and Dittimana, Ditti, isn't it views?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yep.
Spot on. And Elaine, Disa again says, could you explain the difference between mudita and the three other Brahmaviharas? They all seem very closely related to one another. I assume.
The differences between the Brahmaviharas. Mm-hmm. So, in essence, we can say generating metta, so the loving kindness, so this feeling of, instead of conditional love, so I will only love you if you are an architect from the Upper East Side that though lives in Brooklyn, but also is okay to going into the Rockaway Beach. Only these references are familiar with New York City people. But anyway, like list of condition things, which basically are narrowed down to half a person, and then you meet half a person, as we were saying earlier. And then you actually don't even like that half that you had created in your mind to begin with. So instead of narrowing down things, we actually open up things. Actually, as Venerable Santi had skillfully described in talking about compassion. So we tend to naturally care about love for people or for sentient beings that are the closest to us. And then the farther they are from us, we tend to become neutral all the way to indifferent. So there's this caring less and less. So it's pretty much we are the center of all of it. And then according to how sentient beings relate to us, then we will care and love for them. So of course we want to treasure and love the sentient beings that are immediately in our sphere. But the work is to extend it infinitely. So to take the love, the reason why we chant in the Metta Sutta, the recollection of how a mother loves, the feeling of a mother that she generates towards her only child, the infinite love and care. In the same way, may all sentient beings be happy, peaceful, and safe. And whenever we do this, the metta meditation, we see the opening of the heart. We see how we start caring even more about the people that are immediately around us. And then we care more and more about all the rest of perhaps strangers. If we're taking a walk in the park and we see someone we've never seen before, or a little creature sneaking in while we're walking, we're like, oh, actually, let me make sure I don't step on this sentient being. So we see the softening, the love, the compassion that arises based on metta. So understanding that just as we suffer and don't want to suffer, all sentient beings suffer and don't want to suffer. So creating the same sort of conditions for all beings to be happy. And what I actually like a lot, Brahmavihara is usually karuna, but another Pali word that is used for compassion is anukampa, that I always loved, which literally means trembling together. So, when we say, sometimes they can sound like meaningless words, like, oh, we're all in this together, and we're like, oh, not really. I'm on my own, you're on your own, whatever. But actually, no, really understanding that this suffering, as we were saying earlier, the First Noble Truth that it is, we're all in it together. We're all subject to old age, sickness, and death. We're all experiencing suffering. If you see animals, Stan, our cat, lately our monastery cat, has been going through a lot of issues health-wise. And it was no different than when I have health issues or when I see others having health issues. It's no different. So it's just being there and understanding how we are trembling together. And we're trying to get out of that suffering. We all have the same aspiration. It's just that some of us have the teachings of the Buddha and some don't. So when the majority don't, Stan included. So it's so difficult to navigate this landscape. So all we can have is compassion. When we think about it, the natural sort of the most sensical response is compassion. And mudita is rejoicing in other people's good fortune. So once again, counteracting that tendency towards acquisition, towards self-centeredness, like, oh, may I have this? Mine. And then if they give it to Bhante Sudaso, and I don't have the bottle, then instead of cultivating this, bad, uncomfortable suffering of craving. Instead, I go, oh, it's so great that that water bottle made Bhante Sudam so happy. I rejoice in his good fortune. And we see how the mind opens up. There's no suffering anymore. There's rejoicing, right? And there is actually all of these wholesome mind states arise when we start seeing things more clearly, more closely. So because we're developing equanimity. I love the translation that Bhante Sudazo offered a few weeks ago, which is seeing closely. So the more you see closely, the more you actually understand what you're looking at. And the further away it is, the more you're confused and the more distress happens in the mind. So it precludes anything, precludes metta, precludes mudita, precludes compassion to arise in the mind. So they're all interconnected fundamentally, the Brahma Vihars, and we're all cultivating them at the same time. And it's a practice actually of wisdom as well. A lot of times we tend to think compartmentalize things, but actually it's all embedded. It's a practice of mindfulness, it's a practice of panya, of wisdom, it's a practice of concentration too, of holding, developing, and staying, with all these wholesome mind states.
Thank you, Ayasama. And Melinda says, what does namaste mean? I hear it often.
What is what?
Namaste.
Oh, namaste.
It literally means I bow to you. That's it.
Okay. Straightforward. Danilo says, a lot of the time I don't really have an intention other than peace and calm when meditating. Or sometimes I have an intention, but I'm too lazy to go through with it. In those times, should I just sit down and see where the breath takes me? Dun.
Well, intention is really important to pay attention to. I guess I would invite you to, when you register this sense of like not having intention, to really look deeply and just ask yourself, well, why am I doing this? What am I doing here? I bet that can lead you to discover what your intention is. Intention is at the root of all dhammas, all mental phenomena, all actions. You can be adrift, floating from intention to intention, but it can be quite a wholesome practice to really know your intention, to stay with the sense of why you're doing what you're doing, what its purpose is. In fact, you can think of purpose as a kind of synonym for intention. One mindfulness practice just for daily life is to notice what you're doing and what is its purpose, even just in the simplest sense. Like, why am I swinging my leg forward here? Why am I heading to the cabinet in the kitchen where those cookies are? Catching the intentions as they arise can be quite helpful. And when you're in seated formal meditation, that's not a time to just kind of drift. That being said, a kind of open awareness practice can be really valuable at times. And if you sense that's what's needed, just watching the natural unfolding of the mind moment to moment is itself a valuable practice and is an intention too that you can set to be with what arises. But I wouldn't kind of look at it as just, well, doesn't seem like anything's happening, so I'll just kind of roll on. Maybe someone else has something to say about that?
Yeah, and similarly, I would say to watch out for the tendency to just let the mind space out or drift along, because that's not really useful. It's not really useful. If you want a meditation method which is very peaceful and doesn't really involve doing anything, it's called silent illumination, but it's really difficult to do correctly. It's a meditation method which on its surface looks very simple and easy, but in actuality is very subtle and difficult. It's actually much easier to do some form of intentional meditation practice. But yeah, if you just sit down and space out for half an hour and then get up when the bell rings, that's not so helpful. It's better than nothing. It does cultivate a certain degree of peacefulness. And it also helps to strengthen the habit of doing meditation practice and the resolve to do meditation practice. So it's not a total waste of time, but generally speaking, you get much better results from deciding on some kind of method or meditation strategy and then following through on it.
Thank you. And then this is a question I think each of you can answer, since you are all learning Pali or translating the suttas anyway. For those of you who have learned Pali. So Bhavani says, how to learn Pali? Because of my knowledge of Indian languages, I can understand most of the chanting, but I'm not satisfied with translation. Let's start with Bantu Saraso, perhaps.
Well, my normal answer is send me an email and I'll give you some recommendations. But I find that almost nobody ever follows up on that. Yeah, get a grammar book, get a Pali grammar textbook and work through it from start to finish. If you already have a good grasp of Indian languages, it won't be very hard for you. Yeah, just get a book and start jumping into it. The one that was the most influential for me was A.K. Warder's Introduction to Pali. That may not be the best for you. Another one I found really helpful was called New Pali Course by A.P. Buddhatta Mahatera, which unfortunately is out of print, but I think you can find it PDF form online somewhere.
Digitally. Yeah, you can find it. I have that.
Yeah, and another thing which helps tremendously is once you get to a point where you feel like you have a general sense of how the language works, start reading suttas with the Pali text side by side with a translation of the same text. And when you read a line in Pali and then try to understand it and compare it to the English translation or other language if you're using another language, and figure out what the Pali words mean. If there's a word which you really can't figure out what it means, then look it up in a dictionary. Or if you're using an online form, such as the digital Pali reader, then it usually has a built-in dictionary, which makes life even easier. But in this way, you'll start to accumulate vocabulary, and you'll be doing it while reading the suttas, which is very inspiring. It keeps you motivated. So those are my recommendations. If you can understand the chanting pretty well, then you're already getting really close. And you might be able to go directly into the reading suttas side by side with translation.
Any other recommendations from the Venerables?
I think that Bhakti Sudha also covered pretty much everything as far as I'm concerned. I just recommend highly the digital Pali reader, especially if you're familiar with Pali already. It just makes life so much easier. And if you're not familiar at all with Pali grammar, then maybe you want to start with what's it called? The
Pali primer.
The Pali primer. It's a little bit Lady De Silva's Pali primer. It was a little bit difficult for me to use that book, not because of the format is actually great. It's done really well, but it was difficult because it was not sutta based. So it's actually fictitious sort of sentences. So that was difficult for my mind to kind of be interested in the subject matter. But if all you need is to kind of get an understanding of how kind of grammar works, all the declensions, etc., then that's the easiest sort of manual, very DIY. And yeah, once you kind of get a gist of how Pali works, since you're already familiar with Pali, you can just start translating thanks to the Pali reader.
I think the only comment I might add is just from my own efforts to learn Pali. I found it useful to do a little snooping around at the beginning online. There's a lot of resources. There's a wonderful website. I don't remember the name of it, but I do remember getting to it by Googling resources for learning Pali, something very straightforward like that, where you can find descriptions of all of the resources that have been mentioned. People are different kinds of learners. You might see something there that draws you, and it's really that feeling of being drawn towards a particular approach that'll probably get you to where you need to be. There may also be courses that you can enroll in, online courses. There's a lot of interest in learning Pali, and there's a lot of resources available.
Another tool that I found really useful early on was getting declension charts. So charts of all the suffixes and prefixes used in Pali words, and going through them and discerning the patterns that ran through all these different grammatical forms. Because at first it seems like there's a lot of different grammatical forms. But when you look at the charts and you go through them carefully, you'll see that there's clear patterns. So then as I started to figure out the patterns, I started making my own charts, which were meant to be a concise summary of those patterns that I was starting to notice. And that whole process gave me a much deeper, clearer understanding of the relative simplicity of Pali grammar. Relative here to how it looks at first. It's not simple necessarily, but it's much simpler than it looks at first glance. So that's another approach which some people find helpful.
Okay, thank you. And Gita Ratnayake says, in my understanding, every follower is a bodhisattva in Mahayana, whereas Theravada followers are satisfied with attaining arhatship. Is this correct? Bhante Siddhasa?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Yeah, not necessarily. Every person makes their own decisions. So somebody might be practicing Mahayana Buddhism, but their intention is to attain awakening in this life. In fact, that's most of the Mahayana practitioners I've met, to be honest. And somebody might be practicing Theravada, but with the heart and mind of a bodhisattva. So it's not, the lines between Theravada and Mahayana are not anywhere near as clear-cut as scholars would lead you to believe.
And then Gita also says, do all bodhisattvas intend to be Buddhas?
Not necessarily. That's it.
Great. And Disa was thanking Aya for the explanation of the 4 Brahmaviharas. And then says, so mudita is sort of the opposite to jealousy. Is that correct?
Yeah, the opposite of envy, I would say, rather than jealousy. So this is, we're getting into semantics, and also English is not my first language. But I would say, yeah, I guess maybe both, actually. You're both jealous that someone is getting something and envious because you want it for yourself. Fundamentally, there's like a fine line between the two feelings. There's always you in the middle, fundamentally. If you take yourself out of the picture, then there's just mudita.
I also like to think about mudita. So mudita itself just means joy or enjoyment or appreciation. So it's often said appreciating the good fortune of others, but I actually like to take out the self and other part and just think of it as Mudita is appreciating the goodness that's present. So that also then includes yourself, because like all three of the other Brahma Viharas are universal. There's no self and other. May everyone be happy. May everyone be free of suffering. So mudita is also appreciating the goodness of all beings, not only of others from yourself. So that also, to me, helps to open up the practice of mudita outside of the me perspective.
A practical,
I was going to offer simile, but I can wait.
Well, I will just share a story where I shifted from sort of jealousy, craving, envy to mudita, and really that's where I realized how great it was to be in a sort of mudita state rather than the opposite. Was when I first started practicing with the 8 precepts. It's the reason also why I love precepts so much. When I took them formally, at a certain point, I was not eating after noon, but we were holding these dinners at the Rockaway Samurai House for the community. And we would invite members of the community to make food. So we had this Jamaican dinner, which was incredible. And everybody, like for the whole day, I was like smelling all this delicious food at the center and looking at it being prepared. And then the dinner comes and all the people come and they're having a great time and experiencing this delicious food while I'm there sitting with my water. And I'm like, like hating every single moment of it. People going, oh, this is delicious. I'm like, oh man, you're gonna choke maybe with your piece of like tofu. Like, and just like really obsessing about how much I wanted this food and how I hated all the tonics that were available in the Theravada tradition. I would have rather had lettuce than like sweets that we can have, or like cheese. I like hate this. I don't like this. It has to stop. And then we had the Chinese dinner, and it was like same thing, just Chinese version. And then the third one, I actually made it, and I spent the whole day making some of my favorite dishes of Italian food. But as soon as people started coming in, I turned into, we have inside of every Italian, there's like an Italian grandmother. So I was like, oh yes, eat, come on, feed. Oh, and people were happy. And I was like, just delighted that people were enjoying this food that I spent like 12 hours making. And my mind was so full of mudita, there was no thought about me not being capable of ingesting the food. And I was like, this is so great. Why on earth would I spend my time and effort entertaining any other type of thought while I'm in the company of people having food? So actually, since that experience, I've been completely fine being around people having dinner around me without me, I met a few years ago, I was in France actually with Bhante Sudazo, and we both went for non-dinner with my friends who I hadn't seen for a while. And it was great because now I know that I can just, instead of craving whatever they're eating, I can rejoice and I can ask them, oh, is this good? You're having a good time? I'm like, yes, great. And I'm like, it's so lovely that you're having a great time. So actually, I love going now out for dinner.
It's a big change from may everyone choke on their tofu.
Exactly. But, this is how we create our own suffering. So we think that, actually having the tofu, in our mouth will make us happy. But we've tried that experience so many times. It's so counterintuitive, the Dhamma, no? And I never actually had such a great time without food than thanks to the 8 precepts. And Venerable wanted to share?
Well, I was going to share a simile from the Vesude Maga, one of my favorites. I think it's a good one for Gita to think about and trying to distinguish between them. And it relates to what I was saying about radiating each of these qualities outwards. It's pretty well known, but if you haven't heard it before, The idea is that, or the simile is that we can think of the 4 different Brahma Viharas like the love of a parent for his or her child at different stages of development. So metta, loving kindness, is the love of a mother for her infant, the friendly, kind, loving, simple feeling of metta that a mother has for her child when it's very young, and not causing her any problems. Just a cute baby. If you're that baby's mother, you feel metta for that baby. And karuna is the feeling that the parent has for the sick young child. Like when your sick young child is ill, you just want that child to be better. It's a very natural feeling. Mudita is the feeling of a parent for a teenager doing some good deed or having some success at school, say. And upekkha, equanimity, is the feeling of a parent for an adult child, the acceptance of how things go for that child. You're wishing them well and you love them and you want them to be free of suffering, but basically you're accepting that they're on their own. They've gone beyond your immediate ability to take care of. So again, relating to what we were saying earlier about the circle of compassion, like you can imagine those feelings in that family context, and then from there work to feel those different kinds of love for people further and further away from you, not just your in-group, but your out-group, and ultimately for everyone.
Great.
And it seems like we're down to the last 2 questions of the night. So Bhavani asks, if a person becomes rich illegally and rejoices in that success, do I appreciate that? What if I don't appreciate it? Does that mean I'm jealous?
So I would say you can still, so it's important to make the distinction between the wealth that a person has versus what they did in order to attain it. So you can say something like, oh, I'm happy that that person is experiencing material prosperity, while at the same time thinking it is despicable what they did in order to get that prosperity. It is completely unwholesome and inappropriate what they did to get that prosperity. Nonetheless, I'm happy that they're not suffering from poverty. However, they are suffering from the horrendous bad karma that they accumulated along the way. Poor people. Wow. So sad. So you can make that distinction in your mind. And properly speaking, from a Buddhist standpoint, we would say that the material prosperity they're experiencing is not the result of whatever unwholesome and immoral things they did. It's the result of the goodness they accumulated in the past. It's the vipaka, the result of the good karma they accumulated either earlier in this life or in previous lives. And from the outside, it looks like, oh, they got those things by stealing and cheating and lying and so on. But actually, that's not true. They got those things as a result of their good karma from the past. And the unwholesome things they did, the lying and cheating and killing or whatever, will come back to them eventually. So in that case, the proper attitude is compassion. So you can have mudita for the good fortune they're experiencing and compassion for the bad karma that they recently generated. Okay.
And this seems to be the final question of the night, which is, do metta, karuna, mudita, and upekkha relate directly to the 4 rupa jhanas?
No.
I assume.
Santi.
I've never heard a direct connection drawn. I would say no. The 4 arupas, as we refer to them in the suttas, they don't get turned into jhanas actually until the Vesude Maga, recurring themes, I think can kind of usefully be thought of as kind of extensions of the fourth jhana, which is certainly kind of all about equanimity. But no, I haven't. I wouldn't try to line up those two sets of four, or at least it doesn't seem fruitful to me at first.
Yeah, similar
glance.
Yeah, I actually think of the four Brahmaviharas entirely separately from jhanas and arupa attainments. But you can use the Brahmaviharas as an entry point to jhana. But I think of them as separately. I wouldn't try to conflate them in that way.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight for another monk chat on Christmas evening. For those of you on the East Coast anyway, or in the United States. So we can end with 3 sadhus for tonight.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
And enjoy the rest of your evening and weekend.